I have the most entitled in-laws you have ever heard about. They want my mother to move into my house so she can cook and clean all day because they say that she's not worthy. Why? Because she doesn't make as much money as them. So guys, I decide to get a little bit of revenge on my in-laws by doing something a little crazy. I can't seem to understand the entitlement mentality that goes along with the riches. Yeah, I'm rich, but the trace of entitlement's not there. Maybe it's because of my poor background. I'm the only child of my mother, and I never knew my father because he was too irresponsible to stand up when he got my mom pregnant. My mother had to work several jobs as a cleaner just to make ends meet. Most of the people she worked for were rich and entitled people, but the good thing about it was that they were generous most of the time, and after they must have given you some insults. I became a software engineer, and I came up with a way to help my mother make money while putting in a little of her physical effort. I suggested that she starts an online cleaning service business where folks who needed house help could just get in touch with her. She would send one of the people who would sign up with her platform. It was more like an affiliation in a sense. She would charge those seeking the cleaning services on an hourly basis, and the cleaners would receive 60% of the money while my mother kept the rest. I'm currently building an app for her, and I've stopped her from visiting houses as a cleaner because I now earn a decent amount of money to keep her comfortable without working. My mother has seemed dissatisfied with everything I've been doing for her so far. Her problem has been that I'm still single. She's spoken to me on several occasions about getting married, and she's even attempted a few times to link me up with some ladies that she felt would make a good wife. What I did not tell her is that I already have a lady I'm seeing. Her name's Ashley, and yes, she does come from a rich family. Ashley has a great personality, and I love her, because the entitlement mentality that's found among the rich is not pronounced in her. It's been difficult for me, however, to pop the "will you marry me" question, because Ashley is not homely. I live alone as a bachelor, and she would sometimes come to spend some days at my place. I'm a busy software engineer, and I expect to find a clean home and well-prepared meal after a long day's work, but the reverse was the case. My house would be a mess, and Ashley would want us to eat outside, and I never said anything initially, but it was a giant red flag. If only she was half as homely as my mother, then I would have gotten married to her long ago. Time went by, and Ashley, who had been expecting me to propose to her, began disturbing me to come and meet with her family. I initially refused because it would have given the impression that I planned on getting married to her. Her disturbances became insistent, and, well, I just gave in after she claimed her parents had insisted that we meet with the guy whom she's been telling them so much about. I asked her to discuss it with her parents so they could fix an appointment with me based on their schedule, and she did. Her parents had wanted to meet up with me on a weekday during work hours. I felt it was very unreasonable of an ask, but since it was the time they noted they would be available, I made up my mind to go ahead and meet with them. I did not want to give the impression that I took them for granted. The meeting day rolled by, and I went to Ashley's place, and the moment I saw her siblings, I could tell that the wealth of their parents had absolutely spoiled them. Ashley was hospitable and introduced me to her younger siblings, and she noted that her parents would join me shortly and allowed me to snack on the snacks that she had brought. Well, I was conscious of the time because I had a lot to do that day. I was done with my refreshment, and her parents were still not out, so I called her to be sure that they were still around, and she noted that they were, and assured me that they would be joining us shortly. Well, it took another 25 minutes before her parents strolled lazily to the parlor like they were not expecting anyone. They said they were observing a well-needed rest, and to be honest, I was disgusted. What did they mean by a, quote, well-needed rest when they had fixed an appointment with me of their choosing? I was still respectful and did not point out the fact that they have disrespected me by keeping me waiting for no reasonable reason. The disgust that I had only grew from there. They asked me about my background, and I could tell that they were not impressed by the fact that I was not born into wealth like they were. Ashley's mom asked if I had any single person of reputation in my life besides my mother, and I answered her demeaning question with the truth. I told her it was just me and my mom, who used to be a cleaner. It's not for the fact that I was already out of poverty. I'm pretty sure Ashley's parents would have thrown me out right then and there. They went ahead and asked me what plans I had for their daughter, and I anticipated the question, and I simply told them that we were taking things slow at the moment. I was careful not to imply I wanted to get married to their daughter. Ashley's parents, however, noted that they hoped for my sake I would not use and dump their daughter at the end of the day. I found their words to be indirect threats, and it added to the bitter taste in my mouth. I left Ashley's house that day and seriously began thinking about where our relationship was headed. I went to see my mom to tell her what had been going on in my life for a while, and I told her that I found a lady whom I loved dearly, but she was from a wealthy family and was not very homely. My mother said that there's no use of marrying a lady who would only bring sex to the table. She suggested that I look for some other lady who could keep my home while I'm away fending for the family. My mother noted that if this lady of mine was willing and humble enough to learn, then yes, I could go ahead and get married with her. My mother, however, she said that from her experience, the problem with all these rich folks was that they never wanted to do anything for themselves. They would rather throw money at the problem, and I knew my mother was starting to make sense, and it would be reasonable to not get married to Ashley, as I wasn't sure that she would be willing to learn how to be a homely wife. However, I decided not to jump to conclusions. I made up my mind to speak with her about my seeming reluctance to make her my wife. I reached out to Ashley and invited her over to my place after telling her that we had something important to discuss. Ashley felt I wanted to propose to her and insisted that we meet at one of the fancy restaurants that we were used to. She put on a very beautiful dress, a dress fit for an engagement, and after we were seated at our table, I began telling her that there's no doubt in my heart about my love for her. Ashley was already smiling ear to ear, but I cut it short when I told her that I could not get married to her because the conditions were not right. She became confused and, even a bit concerned, and she asked what I meant by conditions not being right. I opened up to her and told her my reluctance to propose all these things, even though I loved her. It was because she lacked certain skills that I felt were very necessary for keeping a home and making marriage successful. I was still talking when she stood up and ran out crying. She interpreted what I had said to mean that I was breaking up with her. I went after her, but I could not keep up. She's a track star. She drove straight home, and I took some minutes to gather my wits before heading to her house. I got to her house to find the whole family looking at me like I actually killed their daughter. I tried explaining myself to Ashley's parents, but they accused me of insulting them by implying they did not train their daughter well. I apologized for any wrongdoings, but asked that they hear me out. I told them my love for their daughter was not in question. They then asked why I was putting conditions on the one whom I claimed to love before I could marry her. "Love sees no weakness," was what Ashley's mother said. Her quote was stupid, but that was the wrong time to argue that, so I noted that I was willing to marry her if she could learn culinary skills and equally acquire skills needed for homekeeping, as I would love to come back to a habitable home after a day's work. Ashley's parents said there was no need to stress their daughter to do house chores, when I could just hire as many maids as needed. My mother's statements about the rich just throwing money at problems came to mind. My mother had trained me to be a man who could do things without relying on anyone. The times Ashley visited me, she met a sparkling house. I was the one who prepared the meals that we have eaten in my own home, and that was how I wanted to raise my kids. How would I do so if their mother was lazy and could not do those things herself? I told Ashley's parents that I did not deem it fit to bring in maids at such an early stage, when my marriage was still in its infancy. Her parents immediately flared up. They asked me to leave their home and even threatened to deal with me, and They claimed that I was just looking for every means to discard their daughter, just as they had earlier said. I left their home without saying another word. I loved their daughter, but I was not going to let feelings overrule the right judgment. Ashley and I both stayed for a whole week without talking to each other until she paid me a surprise visit on the weekend. Ashley's reason for coming was to tell me that she was pregnant. I knew she loved me, and there's every possibility that she could be tempted to use pregnancy to tie me down. So I told her I was going to need more than her words to believe that she was saying pregnancy. She immediately pulled out the pregnancy result from her purse and handed it over to me. She was 2 weeks pregnant. Her parents were not aware of it, and she did not want them to know, as it would mean trouble. I knew where the whole thing was headed, so I told her that I would not behave like my father by denying my child. I was going to take responsibilities for that kid, but my decision to not get married to a lady who was not homely still stood. She said that she was willing to go to culinary school or something if, well, that was what it was going to take for me to marry her. She, however, noted that the marriage occurred before the skill accusation, so we would conceal the pregnancy. The suggestion was fine with me. After all, this was a lady whom I loved. I told her that I was going to meet with her parents to start the wedding arrangements ASAP. So, I met with my mother and told her that I had decided to get married to Ashley. At that moment, she asked what had changed my mind so suddenly, and I noted that Ashley had promised to go to culinary school after we get married. My mother said it was a bet, trying to change somebody after marriage, and according to her, if they don't change before marriage, they'll never change after. I had to now open up to my mother about the pregnancy thing being the reason why I had accepted to get married to her very quickly. My mother understood, and even though she felt it was still not a great idea, she promised to give me her full 100% support. I met with Ashley's parents to inform them that we would be getting married. They commented that we were glad I had come to my senses. I took my mom to introduce her to Ashley's family, and it turned out that they knew who she was. She had previously worked for them some years ago, and their relationship did not have a happy ending. You could tell that Ashley's parents were disgusted by the fact that they would be united by marriage to their previous employee. My mother, on her own, would have demanded that I call off the marriage if it were in her power. So, the wedding preparations began, and Ashley and I informed everybody that we wanted to get married in 2 weeks. Her parents had no issues with that, so long as the money was available, then anything was possible. They did not support me in any way with the wedding planning, and they even refrained their daughter from throwing in her own money. All they did was just talk against each plan that I came up with, saying that they were substandard and I was frustrated and angry at the same time. I was pumping lots of money into the wedding preparation, but all Ashley's entitled parents could do was label my efforts as substandard. I soon complained about the way my would-be in-laws were making me spend money. If I exhausted everything I had just to get married to their daughter, what would we live off after the wedding? I mean, come on. Ashley's parents defended themselves by saying that the way a man goes about the marriage of his wife shows a lot about how he values her. According to them, the more time he spent giving her a lavish wedding, the more value he ascribed to her. I did my best to ignore them. If not for the fact that their daughter was pregnant and we wanted to hide it from them, I would not marry her despite my love for her. How could they place such a high price on a lady who had zero homely skills to bring to the table? 3 days until my wedding, Ashley's parents invited my mother to their home. My mother wanted me to accompany her, but my schedule was very tight. Besides, I was doing my best to avoid them, so I would not have to be told about some, quote, substandard arrangement that I had made. My mother got to their home and discovered that the reason they had summoned her was to know if she was inviting any guests to the wedding, which, well, mother would not invite her friends to the wedding of her only child. I mean, come on. My mother noted that she had a few friends on the guest list, of course, and Ashley's parents immediately told her, well, strike them off, as she was not allowed to have her friends present at the wedding. My mother, who had already made arrangements for her friends, demanded to know why Ashley's parents would want to, take back the invites. They said that they were going to be some dignified people in the wedding ceremony, and the friends whom my mother would likely invite would leave a disgraceful stain on the family name. The insult was too heavy for my mother to bear, and she did not bear it. She immediately told them off, and noted that her guests would be present on the wedding day, and there's nothing anybody could do about it. I was at work when my phone started to blow up. My mother and Ashley were both calling me. I spoke with Ashley first, and she said her parents had informed her that no wedding was going to be held. I asked what their reasons were, and she did not want to speak over the phone. I then asked her to come over to my house later that evening so we could talk about it then. I had barely ended the call when my mother called. I spoke with her, and she asked that I leave whatever I was doing and make my way straight to her house. I knew it had something to do with her visit to Ashley's home. So, I obtained permission from work on the grounds of an emergency and immediately went to see my mother. She related all that had transpired at Ashley's family's house, and I wasn't happy in any way. It wasn't fair that they had looked down on my mother, and I sided with her and told her I was solidly behind her. I promised to equally talk to my in-laws and give them a piece of my mind. I met with Ashley that evening, and I told her I was already aware of what had transpired. I, however, noted that her parents had no right to make such demands on my mom. Ashley admitted her parents were wrong, but noted that we had come a long way in preparing for the wedding to back down now. She asked me to remember the pregnancy, which we were trying to hide, and pleaded that I save her the shame of allowing her parents to find out about it. I ended up pleading with my mother to reconsider and just send a message out to her friends to sit the wedding out. It was going to put a stain on her relationship with her friends for sure, but I pleaded with her all the same. I made her a promise, too, that I would never give our would-be in-laws any opportunity in the future to disrespect her. The wedding will take place tomorrow. Update number 1. Hey guys, I've gotten married and I'm trying to be a happy man. This is one of the reasons I've decided to let my in-laws influence my marriage with their opinions and demands. Ashley and I have an agreement that she will enroll in a culinary school after our child is born, so I've been the one preparing dishes, and on days when I can't, we eat out. We announced to our family 2 weeks after our wedding that we were expecting our first child. My mom knew Ashley was already pregnant before our wedding, but her parents were in the dark. The plan was to have our child when it was due, but I told them that it had come a little bit early. My in-laws informed us that we were going to visit us immediately after they got news of their daughter's pregnancy. So, I took the day off to entertain them as best as I could. I prepared various kinds of dishes, without the help of their daughter, who was in no good of the kitchen, and even wanted to use her pregnancy as an excuse to be lazy. My in-laws were impressed with my reception, and they started talking about how Ashley, I, and our kid would need to vacation at a very expensive place, since Ashley and I did not observe our honeymoon. I deliberately gave little thought to what they said, and I was already uncomfortable with their presence, as I knew it was only a matter of time before they found a way to offend me. This was something they were somehow good at, and we were done with lunch, and I asked Ashley to help me clear the table. You should have seen the look of shock with her parents on their face. They immediately objected by saying she's pregnant. Wasn't supposed to be doing anything strenuous. They claimed that she could get a miscarriage if I continued subjecting her to stress, and what in God's green earth is wrong with the rich? I only asked my wife to clear the table, and how was that stressful? Her pregnancy was barely 2 months, and there are pregnant women all around the globe who went to work until the 8th month or so. Come on! My in-laws now go to the inevitable part where they would irritate me to my bones. They said that I was doing a poor job taking care of their daughter, and from the signs they saw, I would make a horrible father. They demanded that I ask my mother, who was used to, quote, things like that, aka house chores, to move in with us till their daughter gave birth. Well, I was angry, and I did not bother hiding it. How could they question my ability to succeed as a father, where They are standard for success as parents. I mean, come on. They had gotten their way with demeaning my mother during the wedding stage, and I had promised it was never going to repeat itself. I told them that if they were so concerned about their daughter and grandchild, then they could move in with us to do some chores, but my mom was coming nowhere. They left my house very angry that day, and Ashley refused to talk to me ever since because, as she claims, I disrespected her parents. Update number 2. Things between Ashley and me are getting better. I love my wife, and I know she loves me too, but our problem besides her entitled parents is her laziness and lack of homeliness, which we agreed that she would work on once the child came. Her parents recently showed up at my home yesterday unannounced. They said that they did not want to risk the health of their child or grandbaby, and that was why they wanted to take their daughter to live with them until she gave birth. According to them, their decision came as a result of my unwillingness to properly take care of her and my responsibilities. The visits of my in-laws are always characterized by insults and demeaning statements. Ashley was there while they blasted me with their words, and I tried not to return the favor so there would be no further tension between my wife and me. The implication of what they had said was that my wife and unborn child were both at risk as they lived with me, and their talk of me not being willing to take on my responsibility as a husband and father was because I refused to give in to their demands of having my mother come live with me so she could be a maid for us. I respectfully told my in-laws that my wife would not go with them. I then went on to tell them that I was married to her and they could not come up with plans for their daughter without consulting me. My in-laws were about to leave my house in anger when I finally requested that they inform us beforehand when they wanted to just pop up around my house. I got a call from my mother barely 2 hours after my in-laws had left. She sounded concerned for me. She said my in-laws had called her and accused me of maltreating their daughter, barely a month after professing my undenying love for her. My mom went on to ask if all was well with my marriage, and I told her it was. My mom was not convinced by my answer, and she showed up at our home that evening. I then explained to her that the reason our in-laws claimed I was maltreating their daughter was that I had asked her to help me clear the table after we had all eaten a meal that I single-handedly cooked. I then went on the part where they had demanded that I have her come live with us till my wife had given birth and were further disappointed when I refused. My mother noted it was okay with her, and she could use it as an avenue to teach Ashley a thing or two about homekeeping. I knew it was a bad idea. But my mother was insistent because I was the one doing everything in the house, and it would weigh down me on my, long-run work. I spoke to Ashley about it and told her it would allow her to learn a thing or two. If she took good advantage of the situation and paid attention, she might not even need to go to culinary school anymore by the time my mom's stay was over. The discussion between Ashley and me was heartfelt, and I made her understand I was doing it because I wanted to save our marriage. My mother would be moving in with us in exactly 2 days. Update number 3. My mother is currently staying with us, and I'm glad that Ashley's not taking, undue advantage of that fact. She's learning very fast, and my in-laws heard about it, and my mother-in-law began visiting our house daily just so that she could spite my mother by bossing her around. This was something I had vowed would never happen again. What she did not know was that her daughter and my mother were beginning to bond. And the more Ashley learned from my mother, the more she was disappointed with her parents for raising them the wrong way. Ashley and I had an appointment with the doctor one of those days, and my mom was all alone in the house. According to my mother's account of the story, Ashley's mom had showed up and, in her usual manner, wanted to send her on errands all over the place. Barely 5 minutes after she arrived, she screamed my mother's name like it was an emergency, only for my mother, who came running to hear her demand for a drink of water. That's right. My mother, who had enough of her nonsense, told her to get up and get it herself if she was thirsty. She reminded me that she was not her employee and was only in the house because she wanted to make things easier for me, her son. Ashley and I were on our way back home when her mother called and began claiming my mom had verbally assaulted her because she asked her for a cup of water. Ashley simply apologized on behalf of my mom, and she did not, She did that not because she believed her mom, she just wanted to shut her mom up. We were both certain that she somehow must have been at fault, and we get home, and my mom told us that Ashley's mom had come to the house. The first and only thing Ashley did was apologize for whatever headache her mother must have caused my mom. Ashley would be due soon, and ever since my mother stood up against her, the constant visits meant to demean my mother had ceased, and I'm glad because of the peace that I'm now experiencing in my home. I'm indebted to my mom for the impact that she has on my wife so far. It's like my wife is now a different person altogether. Update number 4. Guys, Ashley and I are now the proud parents of a beautiful girl. We decided to throw a little party 3 months after we welcomed our child, and our in-laws were present. They were shocked to find their daughter helping around with my mom to entertain the guests who were present. Ashley's mom immediately took her side and began telling her it's wrong for her to be doing that, what she's doing, and she was a different breed and was not meant to degrade herself. She claimed Ashley was embarrassing her and her father, and it's clear that she was saying so because some of her rich friends were there. My mother-in-law saw my mom pass by to attend to the guest, and she immediately went after her to embarrass her for letting her daughter, who had just given birth, pass through stress. She began creating a scene right then and there, but my mother purposely kept quiet. Ashley, who at this point had been seeking an opportunity to call out her parents for their entitlement attitude, walked up to her mother and demanded that both she, her husband, and her friends leave our home at that very moment. Ashley's parents were shocked and embarrassed at what Ashley just demanded, but I immediately backed my wife up by demanding they leave without wasting any time or risk being thrown out by me. We went to visit Ashley's parents the next day as we knew that they were offended. Don't misunderstand me though, we did not go to offer any form of apology. We just went to put an end to the whole drama, and my in-laws, who were expecting an apology, demanded that Ashley and I throw another party for just their friends, and we would apologize for kicking them out of the previous one. Their entitlement mentality is still very, very high. Ashley noted that she had single-handedly prepared the meal that was served at the party, a meal that everybody attested to being great. She pointed out that this was something that she had never done in all her life while living with them, and they encouraged nothing but lazy attitude among her and her siblings. She told her parents that rather than being grateful that my mom had helped them do what they failed to do as parents, they were busy still feeling entitled. She then made it clear that we were not there to offer an apology, and if we were to host any party, which we would not, by the way, it would be to tell their friends what kind of failures they were as a parent. With that said, Ashley notified her parents of the restraining order that we obtained that morning against them. She told them to never come close to us for as long as they lived, and her parents were angry and hurt at the same time as we walked out of their house. It's been 6 months since the event, and my mother's gone back to her house. Ashley is, however, doing a good job of keeping our home nice and homely. Okay, so kicking the in-laws out at the end of the story, some commenters were actually saying that's going a bit too far. I do want to hear from you guys. Let's put yourself in OP's perspective and know exactly what OP went through the entire story dealing with these in-laws. Would you have changed anything differently? Maybe you have an absolute nightmare in-law story you want to share in the comment section down below. It doesn't necessarily have to relate to this story, just give me your best story you got. Guys, my name's Mr. Reddito. Thank you for joining me on today's videos. Another in-law story that was a wild ride. Check mark. Okay guys, make sure you subscribe. I'll see you tomorrow, and remember, it's cool to be kind. Peace.